As Johnny mentioned, it's home game for me. Therefore, let's start with the introduction. My name is Julian Frey. I work as an Oracle consultant. You see here my contact details, the company, and my own blog, my personal blog, my Twitter handle. You can find me on LinkedIn and wherever you like. Beside being a board member of the Swiss Oracle user community, I'm also one of the founders of the Oracle Beer Burn meetup. If you're attending from the start of the afternoon, you've seen that we will have, in cooperation with the Swiss Oracle user community, a tech pub quiz. And next week there will be a Q&A session, where I show you more on the last slide. Beside that, I'm also a member of the Oracle ACE program. I'm based in Switzerland, in the middle of Switzerland somewhere, and work as an Oracle consultant at Diderex, as already mentioned. As a consultant, I'm at many different customers. One of my biggest customers had the problem or the target to have two databases, one in a secure network zone and one in a more public open network zone, where we had to handle data in between. We had many discussions how to transfer the data from one database to the other database. One possible way would have been opening up network ports or writing CSVs, or I think you all know different ways on how to transfer data between two databases. And in the end, we came up with why not use ORDS, because then we can use the firewall rules, the web application firewall already in place, and we are on a really secure way for transferring data. We agreed to go with ORDS for the data transfer, but then we came up with some questions. One question would be, where is the best place for the web server? Should we place the web server on the database server, on a Docker container, or do we have to create the new web server or implement the new server architecture? What are the requirements there? How to secure the REST API? Are we able to use the full infrastructure in place at this customer with certificates, or do we need exceptions for custom certificates and so on? How do the applications authenticate? What possibilities are there for this? How do we maintain this installation as a DBA? That's probably an interesting topic, because are we now responsible for applications like ORDS? And then with maintaining, who is doing the upgrade? Because this current environment is really high automated, and it would be great to automate the upgrade of the ORDS environment too. Therefore, all these questions came up, and that's somehow the reason why I started with this presentation, because I think when I started with ORDS with this idea, it's quite easy. You see a lot of great blog posts or by Jeff Smith and all these guys, or by Tim Hall, Oracle Base. You see some blog posts how to install it, but how does it look like in a larger environment with some security concerns? And in the end, how do we implement it in a professional environment? So for a start, let's see how the base architecture is of ORDS. Of course, we need a database. And as already mentioned, we need a web server where ORDS is installed. And then we have the JDBC connection between this ORDS installation and the database. And then we need A client could be, in this example, it's a web browser which connects over HTTP or HTTPS to this web server for getting all the information out of the database. That's well-known three-tier architecture, nothing special in here. What are the requirements for all these different components? Let's start with the application server. That's quite easy. We need an application server, Java EE application server. Official supported are Oracle WebLogic Server or Apache Tomcat. It should be possible JBoss, but it's not supported, but you could use JBoss. Then you have the Eclipse Jetty. If you install ORDS as a standalone, which is the easiest way for installing it, then you have the Eclipse Jetty web server. Or yeah, that's almost you need on an application server level. What's required too, you need Java 8 or a newer version. That's all you need from here. With the Eclipse Jetty, I think that's a good starting point. And we are at this custom, we are currently using it on Docker, using the Eclipse Jetty, the standalone version, as the easiest. If we are at the point where we need features of full application server like Apache Tomcat or WebLogic, we'll probably change then to another web server, which is quite easy changing this infrastructure. You only need the configuration. On a database level, that's also quite easy. We need a Oracle database, newer 11G R2. You all or a lot of attendees attended this session before by Mike and Daniel. I hope you're not on 11G, but I know there are many 11G R2 installations out there, but you're able to use it. Then you need some database objects. ORDS is installing these database objects and users for all the database in-database actions. And then you need a sys user, or if you do not use the sys user for the installation, you could use the ORDS installer privileges.sql in the ORDS zip file for installing all these database objects. Therefore, you don't need a lot of database requirements. You can use it on almost every database currently flying around. And from the client perspective, still here, web browser, because that's how it was the easiest for drawing. You need a Microsoft Internet Explorer 8 or later. And when I mentioned before, I hope you're not using 11G R2. I really hope you're not using Microsoft Internet Explorer 8 or even later, but that would work. Mozilla Firefox 3 or later, I think that's also quite old. Google Chrome .2 or later, which is also quite old. And the easiest one is you could use curl or every tool able to send HTTP 2.0 requests. Therefore, on a client perspective, there aren't many requirements for using ORDS. I mentioned one reason for using ORDS, which is transferring data between two databases or two sites or two applications, but there are many possibilities for DBAs. We are able to gather all to have a data dictionary access, which means there are already pre-built endpoints for getting information of the data dictionary out of the database via ORDS. In the end, you'll get a JSON response of your AWR reports or all the data dictionary views we all know. One important part, I think, is monitoring performance information. As mentioned before, the AWR reports, you're able to configure, you're able to access many performance views via ORDS and then getting it as JSON. This could be quite handy if you have different monitoring tools or centralized monitoring tools which currently do not support the Oracle database, or you have your own written performance monitoring tools. Then you can use ORDS for getting all these information. Then one nice tool is DBA actions, including DataGuard, which means you can create databases, you can delete databases, you can create pluggable databases, you can delete pluggable databases, you can copy, you can create DataGuard jobs, and so on. At this customer, we are currently implementing or engineering using ORDS for Jenkins pipelines for doing all these actions, which helps a lot to have a standardized and officially supported way for doing these tasks in an automated way. And then Oracle Database Actions. I really don't like the name Oracle Database Actions because I think almost everyone can't imagine what's behind Oracle Database Actions. In the end, it's SQL Developer Web. It's the new name of SQL Developer Web, the one you probably know from the Oracle Cloud. It's exactly the one you get there, which is quite nice. They're developing quite fast to have a lot of features of this standardized or the well-known SQL developer as web version. I think Johnny knows that you are able to create graphs or dashboards and so on in SQL Developer Web. If you have questions in this area, Johnny probably will help or probably not. Then how are we installing it or how it's going? We have the ords.war. That's just a war file like a Java application. And we have the client. The client, as in the beginning mentioned, sends the request, the HTTPS request, hopefully to the ords.war. And all HTTPS security features used on the application server, which means if you're using WebLogic or Tomcat, you can use all implemented security features from this application server for all these security requirements you have. Then the database you have here, the database, and the ords.war sends the JDBC request to the database. There's a built-in driver by Oracle. It's a unique driver or an independent JDBC driver. You can download this JDBC driver separately and use it in your application if you like. Luckily, it's developed by Oracle, which means all the HA features like application continuity and so on are supported, which is quite great. Then if you know application continuity, you can switch databases around and so on without any downtime of the application in the end. So we have the ords.war, and we need an installation of on the database. We do have 3 different installation options. The first one is the database actions. As you can see, you have there the SQL Developer Web. You probably already know where you are able to develop and deploy your REST APIs. Then you have a data modeler, you have charts, you can administer some users and so on. The first feature I used at this customer is the REST-enabled SQL. You can send SQL statements or execute PL SQL packages over the REST API, send a REST endpoint or a REST request to the database, and get all the information as a JSON output to the client. You're able to delete, update everything. I'm not going too deep in, or I'm not going really deep in this presentation, because first of all, we are not developers. Second, there are many blog posts and videos out there which describes how to use it, how to develop against it, and I'm not a developer. Therefore, if I would do presentations or demos on this specific topic, I probably would tell you not the correct thing. And the third part is the database API. Database API is, as mentioned already, the part where we are able to create pluggable databases, to manage all our databases, all our environments. What is important, you can install the REST-enabled SQL or the database API, but if you install database actions, you're installing all features, all components in the database itself. For us as DBAs, it's probably important to know, how we're going to install it on a PDB or in the database if we have multiple PDBs. The one way we can use is we can install ORDS in a PDB. That's probably the same thing we would do with 11G R2. We're only able to manage this PDB and not managing different PDBs. I think this is the way probably we're going with production databases. We're not willing to have ORDS enabled on all the PDBs, just on one PDB where we need the ORDS. This could be a reason for that. The other way is we are installing ORDS on a CDB level, which means ORDS will be installed in the CDB itself and on all PDBs in this database. Also in the PDB seed, which means if we create the new PDB from seed, we'll have the ORDS already installed in this PDB. We can install multiple versions or update the version and keep all the PDBs updated with this ORDS version. That's the way, or that's the installation option I prefer for fully automated integration testing or development environments where I need the features for creating pluggable databases and so on. And the developers probably need access via SQL Developer Web. Then I install ORDS on a CDB level and can automate everything in this environment via this API, which is quite handy then. And if you use application containers, I've never used application containers yet, but if you use them, you're able to install ORDS in the application container root, which means you have then ORDS in the app root and in the app seed and all these application PDBs installed. If you're using this concept of application container and you need the ORDS API for acting with microservices or whatever, then probably this is the easiest way for keeping all your application containers or application pluggable database on the same level. That's quite nice for us, having everything installed easily. Then the next point is how we authenticate. We do have the basic authentication, which is a username and password stored in a file for ORDS. I'll get back to this later on. Then we do have the database authentication, which is username and password in the database. And then the third possible way is OAuth 2, 3-legged or 2-legged. You can use both options for authentication to the database. One important thing I think we have to know is ORDS. In the ORDS topic, we're talking about roles and privileges too. ORDS roles are different than database roles, which means you don't see them in DBA roles or sys privilege privs or tab privs or whatever. You define them with ORDS define privilege or ORDS create role. These are only for the mapping of the tasks you're doing with ORDS. If someone is talking about ORDS roles, they do not think or talk about database roles like DBA or whatever. That's a total different story. How is the ORDS then connecting to the database? I used the example I used already before. We create the poke and with use with secure PV, grant the quota, unlimited on users, grant create session and create table to this user, connect as this user, create table beer. As mentioned before, I'm a DBA, not a developer. Don't judge me on my code. And we insert a beer into this table. And now we want to access this beer table. We want to get this beer from the database via ORDS. We have to enable this schema. As you can see, I only grant the create session and create table, but I'm able to enable this schema for ORDS. Therefore, no special privileges are required for a database user for enabling himself for using this API. For the ease of use, I use curl with post. I could use curl with get or whatever. In this scenario, I use post. I send it to my ORDS installation with SQL. Authorization is basic. In this case, it's the database username and password as base64 encrypted. This is the important part for a post. The content type of the body will be applications SQL, and then the data, the body is select star from beer, as a DBA would select the table from this table. And what do I get from as an output? First of all, I get some information about the environment, some time zone information. Then I got a list of items where statement type is query. There could be, or there are different types of statement. We have a start line and an end line. We know we only have one item in this table currently. Then we also get the statement text, my select star from beer, some meta information like column name, how is this column name represented in the JSON format or JSON document, the column type, some precisions in information, and then we got all our items. In this case, the beer list and some more information, the limit, offset count, and so on. If we do need pagination or other fancy tools, this information are here available for developers. But yeah, we do have nowhere configured how ORDS is connecting to the database. ORDS is connecting to the database with the ORDS public user and with a connection pool defined in size. But how does then the application connect as user poke? During the execution, I select how many schemas are connected, how many poke schemas are connected to this database. One poke schema. Oh, Oracle is using proxy user, which means with the ORDS enable proxy, enable ORDS enable schema, I grant the proxy privilege to a different user. And as mentioned, that's the ORDS public user. With this setup, Oracle is able to have a predefined connection pool and connecting through the ORDS public user to this poke user. I think that's quite nice and eliminates the effort for handling probably a different connection pool for every different user, or if you're doing SQL Developer Web and probably some database actions, you don't need different connection pools. You can use the same one. But what is if username password is not right? I think most application developers would not be happy with using username and password in their application. Then, as mentioned, OAuth 2, which is a token-based authentication scheme. Developers should probably or will know that how you can use tokens with a third-party trust and so on, or you could build your own authentication scheme if you like it. But what is it with DBA tasks? If we're doing DBA tasks in the DB or in a pluggable database, then the user needs DBA and PDB DBA privileges. But as I mentioned, yeah, we are able to create pluggable databases or delete pluggable database. And ORDS, we can't enable a schema on ORDS on a CDB level. What we're gonna do there, we create a common user. In this example, common user C## DBA API CDB admin, again identified by a secure password. We grant sysdba to this common user with container all, and then we have to make ORDS aware of this user. We write this information in a properties file and configure the ords.var with set properties and then which configuration and the configuration files. Then this username and password got encrypted by AES 512, I think, in a file, and will be used for PDB actions like creating a pluggable database, stopping, starting, deleting a pluggable database, and of course, remember to delete this file afterwards. But I mentioned I can create databases itself. Again, ORDS file-based user is required. And we have to grant this user this system administrator privilege. That's a privilege on ORDS itself. This user will also be stored in a ORDS in the ORDS configuration and is able to do DBA tasks. I mentioned it many times now that creating a database is possible with ORDS. How would that look like? In my example, I use again curl. I think most of the DBAs are aware of curl with a post. in this case. I send in this example not SQL. I send a JSON document. Again, basic authentication with the user I previously created with the system administrator privilege role. Send it to the server with the DB API stable, and then the interesting part for us, environment, homes, RDBMS databases. If I do a get on this case, I will get all the databases installed on this server. And if I do a post, I'm able to create a database. It's currently not possible to create a wallet or to use a wallet. The password stored in the configuration of the ORDS.war configuration is encrypted, is stored encrypted and salted, I think. Therefore, it's secure, but I would secure it from file system access and so on. But no, currently not, unfortunately. Then the data, the body we send, probably you recognize these variables from DBCA jobs. We do have a global database name. We use a template name. If you have used the DBCA already for creating a database, you probably already know the general purpose template. I only used it for the example here. You could use your own template. And then, of course, system user and sys user and response file we have created before, dbca.rsp in this case. You can use almost every parameter here, almost the same parameter or the same parameters which are available for DBCA too. And what happens then? We get a response and a location. This location does have a job ID, DBCA jobs. Here you can see we are creating a DBCA job, and if we use this URL, we'll get the response, and we get a JSON body description: run DBCA to create a database. Status in this case is running. Operation is great. Again, all the response file, general purpose, the global database name, username, total memory, whatever I configured in the body, in the post I set, and then we got the DBCA log. I think you all know the DBCA log, the 10%, 40%, and so on. Therefore, ORDS is sending or creating a DBCA job in the database or on the database server for creating a database, which is quite nice for automating everything. We'll use at my customer not creating databases, we'll use creating pluggable databases and deleting pluggable databases. As a side note, if you're on 19.7 or newer, I think, then you're allowed to use 3 pluggable databases in one CDB if you without having the multi-tenant option licensed. Therefore, you can create and delete, test, or whatever databases in an automated way. So, but now, how would this look like, this installation in an enterprise scale, or what is my plan at my customer in here? First of all, we have our database network with a CDB with the ORDS installation, which means we do have the most current ORDS installed in the CDB and also in PDB seed and PDB 1, 2, 3, and so on. That's quite easy. Then we do have an application network where all the other applications are stored or are running, like probably on a Docker environment or OpenShift or WebLogic, whatever you like. And we do have some firewalls in between, hopefully, with only the ports opened, the port open 1521 or whatever port we use for the listener here, which means we do not have different access here. We do have the same access to the database as every other application is using. Then we do have our application. I think this scenario is probably not be used, but if we do have an application which has directly access to this the CDB or PDB, then this application can use the normal JDBC driver or SQLnet or whatever, or is able to use ORDS as a REST request, send a REST request to ords.war, and ORDS is sending this REST request to the database and sending back then the JSON output to this application. I think that's what a normal installation be, except I think either you as an application you use this way or this way. Just for the ease of destroying, I used both in the same application. And then we do have our public network where the browser, probably if it's a web application, is connecting to the application server via HTTPS. And we have some web application firewalls in between and all the security stuff our security team requires for accessing some data. Therefore, we are not opening up any security holes. We are in the same network. We're using the same security and all these certificates available in our environment. But now we can use for our developers. Our developers have probably some more access or some further access or need access to the SQL developer. And as long as we do not have some jump hosts in the application network or in a different network for the developers, it's quite hard to give them access directly to the database in this scenario. Therefore, they have an independent developer network. We have, in this case, database actions, Oracle database actions installed, and the developers are able to access SQL Developer Web, again, through web application firewalls and then to ORDS. And the developers are able to see their execution plans and everything they like handling or executing statements or whatever the security concept in detail allows them to do directly on the database, but they are able to monitor, to create AWR reports and so on without getting them access either directly to the database or, in my case here, the enterprise manager installation would be good for doing things for the developers, but creating a role concept and managing privileges for all developers is not easy in enterprise manager. Therefore, we're planning to do it. We're currently setting it up and testing it, having the access for developers to SQL Developer Web. And in this case, at this customer, only for development or integration databases. At the moment, probably also for production, but we're still some kind of not willing to provide developers direct access to production database. And the third thing we will implement is we will use Jenkins and create pipelines for deployment of applications, which means we're planning to have a Jenkins pipeline. Developer or whoever deploys the application is checking in everything on Git probably and using Flyway and all these fancy tools. Jenkins is then executing all the steps, including one pipeline or one step for creating a pluggable database for this scenario, and then deploying all the whole application, probably with test data in this new pluggable database, and providing feedback to the developer or whoever executes the pipeline. Your application is ready on a new database. One scenario we're currently discussing is with fully automated integration tests, creating the pluggable database, deploying the application, setting up everything, setting up test data, running automated tests, and deleting the pluggable database afterwards, which in this scenario of ORDS would be only one REST call to this ords.war, and then or one for creating the database and one for deleting the database, which would ease in our life as DBAs, because else we would have to use Ansible for accessing the server and executing Ansible or another automation tool or shell scripts for accessing the server, executing SQL statements for creating the pluggable database, and so on. And here we have a fully supported and maintained API for the database provided by Oracle. With that said, I think we're at the questions section. Do we have some questions? Let me check. Sorry about that. Yeah, 19C. I'm not sure which 19C version it was, but thanks, Frank, for that. Are there any other questions?